Let's lead and
Hey,
live in
friends,
our own
welcome
way.
to the Less Stress, More Joy podcast with Amy Leneker. It's me, Amy, and I am so glad that you're here. Let's get into our topic for the day, which is values. And we're going to look at values as a lens of what is most important to us. And the exercise that we're going to do comes from my new book, How Could It Not? So in Cheers to Monday, I looked at the research on values and the connection between our values and the stress and the joy that we experience at work, and the stress and the joy that we experience outside of work. And there is no question that they're connected. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to identify what your values are so that we can end up with less stress and more joy by aligning ourselves with those values each and every day. The thing about values is that it's not going to take all of your stress away. Wouldn't that be great if it did? If just living into your values meant that your annoying coworker was no longer annoying, or that your unmanageable workload was no longer unmanageable. That's not how values work. They don't remove stress, but they help you respond in a way that protects your joy. And those are two really different things. And that's where we're going to focus our energy today, is how can we use our values to reduce stress, knowing that we can't remove it, but creating more space for joy in our workplaces. So I'm curious, think about a moment when you felt joyful at work. And maybe it is your current job. Maybe it's a memory from a year ago or 10 years ago. I had a woman do this exercise once, and it was from 30 years ago that she thought of a joyful memory. So there's no timeline. There's no rule. Just think of a moment that you felt joyful at work. So joyful memories, remember what that was, because we're going to come back to it in just a few minutes. We're going to come back to that moment when you felt joy at work. Let's go a little in the other direction for just a moment, and let's talk about stress, because stress and joy are not opposites. And I thought they were. When I began the research, I just assumed they were, because there aren't many feelings that feel more opposite to me than when I'm feeling stressed and when I'm feeling joyful. But I was completely wrong. The research shows they're not opposites at all, because stress is a reaction and joy is a feeling. So we can do both at the exact same time. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how challenging has your stress been? No right answer, no wrong answer. The reason why I asked you about how challenging your stress has been is because in all the interviews that I conducted, I did over 150 interviews with leaders and focus groups. The higher amounts of stress we feel, the more likely we are to get pulled out of our values. And that's really important for us to understand, that when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling pulled thin, when you're feeling stretched at work, we're more likely to get pulled out of our values. And when we do, when we get pulled out of our values, everything starts to feel worse. We feel misaligned. We might start reacting instead of responding. Now we have to go back and clean things up because we said something that we didn't mean to say. So it's important to pay attention to our stress levels, because it has a direct impact on how easy it is for us to live into our values. I'd like you to think for just a moment about a stressful conflict at work. Not an easy conflict, not one that just took a 1-minute conversation and you resolved it and moved forward. But think about a stressful conflict. Maybe it went on for a while, or maybe it was too hard to even engage, so you had to avoid it or you had to carry it without any resolution. Or maybe the emotions were just high. Maybe it was something that weighed on you. You found yourself thinking about it as you were driving home from work. You found yourself thinking about it first thing in the morning. That's a stressful conflict at work. So you've got your joyful memory and you've got your stressful conflict. So tuck both of those away because we're going to bring them back in just one moment. What we're going to do now is discover your top 3 values. There is no magic number around 3. If you do this exercise and you say, there's 2 that stand out, 2's the right number for me, or if 4 is the right number for you, there's no magic around. I would just encourage you to not have too many. If you start getting beyond 3, at least in my leadership coaching experience, if you start to have more than 3, it's harder for people to remember those. It's harder for people to live into those. My top 3 are family, service, and kindness. So a few things that can help. And these come directly from Brene Brown's research on Dare to Lead. I'm a Dare to Lead facilitator, and this question comes up at almost every Dare to Lead workshop I facilitate. So when you're thinking about your values, there's 3 guiding questions that can help you take this list down to a much smaller number. The first one, does it define you? Does that word define who you are at your very core? That's the first one. Second, does it help you make decisions? When you're at a crossroad, you can go one way or the other. Does that value help you make a decision? And then the third one, and I think this is the most important one because this is the one where I see the light bulbs go on during Dare to Lead workshops. Is there a value that gives you the ability to do the other values? And that is a game-changing question. So you may have seen Brene shares her story that family is not one of her top 2 values. And she wrestled with that. Like, how is that possible? Of course, my family is important to me. But her values of courage and vulnerability, those are what allow her to show up with her family the way that she wants to. So it's not about having to choose everything. It's when I look at this list, are there some of these that allow me to do all of the other ones? And sometimes that starts to shine a little flashlight on the ones that are most important. So as you're thinking about your top values, and if you choose to do this with your team, and I hope that you do, your values are that compass that's going to help you make decisions. And values are what you want to align with when you're having conflict, when you're feeling stressed. I just did a workplace mediation yesterday. I'm a certified mediator. I specialize in workplace conflict. I mediate hundreds of hard conversations every year. And when I do a workplace conversation, a facilitation, I always start with values. I don't know how to navigate a hard conflict for you if I don't know what's most important to you. And so I always start by having the participant share what are their top values and then what those values mean to them. Because what you may find with some of your colleagues is that you may have a different value, but when you describe it, you're actually talking about the same thing. Or you might have chosen the same word, but when you describe it, you're talking about 2 very different things. So it's not enough to just say, oh, okay, I know that you value community. I have to go a step further and make sure I understand, what does community mean to you? There is research out of Harvard Law School. And I love this because I've known this anecdotally since I've started mediating workplace conflict, but it's so validating to have research from Harvard Law that now shows it, that the most difficult workplace conflicts to resolve are about values. We might think we're in conflict over a hiring decision or a implementation strategy, but if the conflict is taking a long time, if it's really emotional, if it's causing angst in the relationship, chances are it's about values. And the time to know what you value, the time to know what other people around you value is long before you're in conflict. You want to be able to figure that out now. So that's my challenge to you. Do this exercise with your team. find out with each other, what is it that we value? A recent mediation that I did, it's not that recent, it's been a couple years now, but it's such a great example of how this works. So there was a manager and an employee who had been in conflict for over 6 months. And it was hard conflict to where people were having to choose. You could either be with the manager or you could be with the employee, but you couldn't be on both sides. And that's when the agency brought me in. And so I started with values like I always do. And look what happened. The manager's number one value was honesty. The team member's number one value was integrity. Different words, but when they described what those words meant to them, they were describing the exact same thing. So within just a few minutes of starting the conversation, they realized that, wow, this person that I have been in really tough conflict with for 6 months shares the exact same top core value as me. When they shared their second value, the manager's number two value was collaboration. The employee's number two value was autonomy. There are fireworks going off in my brain because, of course, there's conflict. So we started talking about, well, how are you demonstrating your value of collaboration? And all the things the manager was trying to do to be collaborative were butting up against what the employee really wanted in autonomy. And all the ways that the employee had been trying to live into autonomy, they were trying to make their own decisions and not ask for help. Those were butting up against what the manager really wanted as a collaborative team. So knowing the values, it didn't erase 6 months of conflict. It took a while. It took several conversations. It took several months for them to rebuild the trust that they had lost during those 6 months. But what it did do is it finally helped them understand why. Why are we having this conflict that we're having? Research shows that sometimes we value things that we've inherited. We value messages that we've received directly or indirectly. So with a lot of leaders that I coach, there's this process of saying, is that your value, or is that a value that you have just assumed was your value? So there's the real work. It's taking away what it should be, and it's saying, this is really what's important to me. The other thing that can help is to give yourself the grace of saying, this season of my life. So these are the values in this season of my life, because your values might change. Your values might evolve. I work with leaders all of the time who have a significant life event and it changes their values. Either I've seen it where when they've had a child, I've seen it when they've lost a parent, I've seen it when a colleague gets sick, that when we have a major life event, our values can shift. And even if our values stay the same, the way we define them might change. Through the pandemic, this was really common with a lot of leaders that I coached who had values like achievement, success. The way they defined those looked different during the pandemic than it did after. So all of that to say, to give yourself the time and the space to reflect on what it really is for you, not what it should be or what it might be. Let's pause and let's see if there's a connection to joy and stress. And don't force the connection, but 99% of the time, when you go back and look at that moment that brought you joy, chances are you were living into your values. And when you go back and look at the moment where you were feeling that high stress conflict, that really challenging conflict, chances are your values were also at play, that your values were either not being acknowledged or not being lived into, or maybe it even felt like they were being stepped on. When we start to use our values as a map of having less stress and more joy, everything starts to shift. There's no shortage of stress in the world. There is no shortage of it. So how can we create workplaces that aren't adding to that stress? And here's the thing about work stress. How we're doing at work impacts how we're doing at home. And how we're doing at home impacts how we're doing at work. This old compartmentalized way of thinking is just not real. And if you look at the latest stats on stress, just a few months ago, the American Psychological Association released their latest stress report. They release it every year. They showed that we are now at the same stress levels as we were in the first few months of the pandemic. Isn't that startling? We are now feeling the same levels of stress that we felt in the first few months of the pandemic. And they also reported that over 50% of American workers say that their work stress is impacting their home life. That's a lot. So if you are part of that, you are not alone. If you're not part of that, then it's a big awareness to say, wow, this might be happening for half of my coworkers. Just one more scary stat from that report, because I share it with everyone I know. I literally shared it when I ordered a coffee yesterday. I always feel so sorry for the people who wait on me at Starbucks because I always share random facts that they probably didn't want or need to know. But it showed that 70% of people who've experienced a divorce or a breakup with a significant other attribute it in part to work stress. 70%. And that number jumped to 79% for Gen X. So really big deal of how work stress is impacting our lives even outside of work. So if we can learn about our values and get curious about our values and find ways to improve our workday, then it actually starts to change our outside time as well. One other thing I wanted to share with you about values, because it's not hyperbole to say it changed my life. I know that sounds so dramatic when someone says, oh, this changed my life. This literally changed my life. Many of you know my burnout story, that I burned out in a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad way. And I got really sick. My body shut down. It was awful. And as I was reflecting back on that experience, as I was writing the book, I was reflecting back on how I got there. How did it happen? What struck me is that when I was at the peak of my burnout, at the worst of the worst of the worst, I was living my values. How is that possible? I had always prided myself on, if I can just live into my values, if I know what's most important to me, if I'm just doing those things, everything's going to be okay. Only it wasn't. And here's why. At that time, my values didn't include me. My top values were, and they're the same that they are right now, which is family, service, kindness. Those are my top three. And at the peak of my burnout, when everything fell apart, I was giving everything I had to my family. I was being of service in the public sector. I showed up every day and gave that job everything I had. I worked evenings, I worked weekends. Kindness, I was kind to the entire world around me. However, I wasn't included in those values. I wasn't thinking about, what does kindness look like to myself? I wasn't thinking about, what would it mean to be in service to myself? Once I had this realization and I started doing the interviews and I started doing the focus groups, I realized I am not unique. There's nothing unique about my experience at all. It happens all the time that we have values that are externally focused. We move through the world in a way of living into our values for the benefit of other people, versus it's also about us. We have got to be in our values. I went on a solo cruise for my 50th birthday. That was me living into my values, and I had to think about it. So the old me, the burnout me who had to take 12 weeks off of work to recover, I would have seen that trip as a failure. I would have seen that as, I am not being here for my family. I'm celebrating my birthday alone. What kind of a wife, what kind of a mother, what kind of a friend does that make me? I would have not seen it as being of service. I would have not seen it as being kind. But now Now that I understand that I need to be a part of those values, I need to be at the center of those values. It was probably the most values rich trip I've ever had because I did live into my values of family. I lived into it because I was really honest with my family about why I was going and how excited I was, and they were excited for me. I share this with you because I don't know if this is resonating with you, but I have a feeling that there is at least someone who's saying, yeah, me too. I've got these values. I'm not doing them for myself. I'm doing them for everyone else in the world, or I'm a leader. I'm doing this for everyone else in my team, but it doesn't include me. There are no good or bad values, but service, yeah, great. Be of service to other people. But there's a tipping point at which now you're actually not even in service of yourself. You have to take care of yourself if you want to take care of anyone else. And I'll tell you, I work with leaders every single day who are taking care of their teams and they're not taking care of themselves. And it's harming the team, it's harming the organization, and it's harming the leaders too. So a moment to pause and say, are you in your values? And if not, then today's your day. If not, today is exactly the day where you say, I'm going to put myself in my values and I'm going to see what happens. Let's now move to the next part of our work on values, which is about connection. Values are a shortcut to connection. They can help you connect to yourself in the way that I just described about my burnout experience. They can help you connect to other people. They can help you connect to what's important to your team, what's important to your organization. And I wanted to share 4 things from research about connection. And this research comes from Gallup. So they have been doing this every year for, I think, 20 years. And Gallup, when they ask this question, they ask it across 52 countries and territories. That's a lot because it represents 76% of the world's adult population. The question that they ask is about work. They ask a question about positive leadership experiences at work. And those are experiences where there's been connection, when there's a positive leadership experience. And what Gallup has found every year since they started is that the exact same 4 things show up. And I think this is fascinating because if you think about 76% of the world's population, there are a lot of differences in that group. Different geography, different industry, different occupation. And despite all of those differences, the same 4 things show up. And these are 4 things that are going to be your shortcut to your values. So let's look at the first one. The first one from their research is trust. It's the foundation of all relationships. And if you are in a work setting right now where trust has been damaged, or maybe trust has been destroyed altogether, values might be a way to build back. Just like the example I gave earlier, it's not going to erase all the conflict. It's not going to make everything fine in one day, but it can start to build a bridge from here's where we are and here's where we're trying to go. Values can start to build that bridge by building trust between you. The second one from Gallup is compassion. And compassion is that you care about me for me. You don't care about me just because I work here. You don't care about me just because I meet our performance metrics. You care about me as a human. And when you understand what someone values, you are understanding what's most important to them. When people share with you, here's what's most important to me, you cannot put a price tag on that data. You cannot put a price on what you're learning because you are learning the shortcut to compassion. The third one from Gallup is stability. And this one is so important right now because everything feels like it's changing. There is change upon change upon change. And stability is that even in the midst of all of that change, that we know what's true and constant. We know why we're here. We know what service we provide. Values provide that same kind of stability. Your values provide that stability to say, even regardless of what's happening around me at work, this is what's most important to me. This is who I am. This is how I want to show up at work every day. And then the fourth and final one is hope. And I love the definition of hope. They define it as things tomorrow are going to be better than they are today. That's the belief. And tomorrow might not literally be tomorrow. Tomorrow might be in a week or a month or a year. But the belief that things are going to be better. Our values are rooted in hope because our values are showing where we are, what's most important to us, and what is the life that we're wanting to live. I wanted to make sure and show this research to you because something really interesting happened last year. For the first time ever, the order of those four things changed. Up until last year, trust, compassion, stability, hope. That's how they showed up every year. But now, look what happened. Hope moved from being number 4 to being number 1. The number one thing that people say I need at work, the number one thing that people say is creating a positive experience, the number one thing that's driving connection is hope. Today, it's worth asking yourself, how are you bringing hope to the workplace? How are you demonstrating hope in what you say, in what you do, in the projects you're taking on? How do you do that? And I believe the answer is the Stockdale paradox. The Stockdale paradox is named after Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war. And he survived an unimaginable 7 years as a prisoner of war. And after that, he was interviewed by Jim Collins, who went on to write the book Good to Great. And Jim Collins said, "How did you do it? How in the world did you survive when so many people around you didn't?" And here was his answer. Admiral Stockdale said that he never confused the faith that he would prevail in the end, which you can't afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the brutal facts of the current reality. That's how he attributes his ability to survive. The ability to say, yes, things are really hard. Things are tough, they are brutal, and they're going to get better. And at work and in life, we have to do the exact same thing. So I live in Washington State, and we're in a budget crisis. State agencies are on a hiring freeze. They're on a spending freeze. Things are tough. So to be able to say, yeah, things are hard, and at the same time, holding the reality of, and we're going to come through it. And in the meantime, we're going to keep providing the service that we do to the people of our state because we do it better than anybody else. That's the paradox. And if you lean too far one way or the other, then trust in you is going to go down. If you're only talking about how hard things are, people are not able to follow that because they need hope. We just learned that. We learned that the number one need is hope. But if all you talk about is hope, if all you talk about is where we're going without confronting how hard it is, then trust in you goes down because people wonder, where are you? What are you not seeing? That's the paradox. That's the goal. If you're ready to reclaim your time, energy, and the joy you were meant for, take a deep breath and join me. Order my new book, Cheers to Monday, the surprisingly simple strategy to lead and live with less stress and more joy everywhere books are sold. If you've got a question, shoot me an email, amy@amyleneker.com. Less stress, more joy, zero toxic positivity. That's the Joyful Rebellion.